The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is back in session. It is August 20th, 2025, and there has been a wave of news throughout last week and half of this week. There is so much going on that it has become a total nightmare to cover. So, before we start today's video, I want to go on some sort of rant, okay? Now, people have been reporting stuff from Deep State UA that they perceived as truth. Now, you have to understand that Deep State, as of this video, is under the direct supervision of the Ukrainian state. And because of that, they are going to bog down their operations and to prevent them from telling you everything that you really need to know, like that's like going on the ground. And this example of how bogged Deep State has become, we will see later in this video. But let me make this clear right now before we go any further, that there is a lot of stuff that we don't know right now about certain fronts. And there's also stuff that just flat out makes no lick of sense whatsoever. So please be aware of that. I will also call out some people on both sides of the aisle for the informational mess that things are in right now. And yeah. So, with that being said, let's start today's video. Now, as all of you know by now, Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump met in the Alaskan city of Anchorage. And this is like the only big like urban settlement in all of Alaska, Anchorage. And they met at this large Air Force base within the city, like within the outskirts of Anchorage. Pretty large, if you ask me. And the talks apparently went supposedly well, and the report is that Russia made some concessions. Now, these reports apparently claim, or suggest, that is that Russia is willing to stop its war in Ukraine if the Ukrainians were to give up the rest of Donetsk region that they still control, which includes the cities of Krasnaya Amisk, aka Pokrovsk, the city of Dobropila, Belitsky, Rudinsky, Slovyansk, the Kramatorsk, and Liman. And in return, the Russians would no longer pursue the rest of Ukraine, or like other parts of Ukraine, like the Kharkov region, the Sumy region, the Kherson region, the Dnepropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. They would no longer pursue any further territorial conquest in return for just getting Donetsk region as a whole under their control. Now, how true are these claims? To be honest, I don't fucking know. The claims that the mainstream media has spread about what Russia is like wanting in return for a supposed comprehensive deal or like a peace in Ukraine is very iffy. And to be honest with you guys, I don't seem to believe it. Part of the problem is that when Russia annexed the 4 regions in Ukraine, Donetsk, the Lugansk, Zaporizhzhia, and the Kherson regions, the Constitution states that they must be under complete Russian control. Literally. So that means the provincial capitals of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson have to be conceded to Russia in order to find a just peace in Ukraine. Well, partly. And this was stated by the Russians themselves at Istanbul. Earlier this year, that is. But as you and I know by now, there were no successes at Istanbul. It went worse than the first talks. And quicker, too. Yeah, they managed to exchange some prisoners and all, but that was about it. In addition, there have also been talks about security guarantees to Ukraine. But the problem, though, is that even though the U.S. has promised no NATO membership for Ukraine, they are basically going to make them a de facto member of NATO regardless. Like, they're a NATO member in all but name. That is what they're aiming to achieve with these security guarantees for Ukraine. So, Ukraine effectively is still literally in the Western Hemisphere because of that, and Russia gets screwed in such a hypothetical deal. Like, literally, in this case, they cuck. Minsk III, Vladimir Putin gets ostracized and perhaps overthrown by his own people, maybe his own people, like, I don't know, like, within the government, and nothing gets done. All those hundreds of thousands of lives were all wasted. And if Ukraine were to concede any sort of land to Russia in a peace deal, then all those guys who died in the war also died for nothing. So, it's a very stupid situation that Russia and Ukraine are in right now, and all to appease a man whose ego is so fragile. It is like as fragile as glass. Like, once you drop that glass, it breaks. That's what Donald Trump's ego is. He wants that shitty, corrupt metal. The Nobel Peace Prize. Obama literally won that thing for nothing. And my family supported Obama. But did I think he deserved it in retrospect? Hell no! He did not deserve that Nobel Peace Prize. Iraq is still in somewhat in turmoil. Syria is pretty much destroyed. Libya is fucked. Yemen is fucked. Afghanistan is under the Taliban. Israel is still wreaking havoc. He literally got nothing done from a foreign policy standpoint. Nothing. I mean, yeah, you got rid of Bashar al-Assad and Gaddafi, but what did that result in? Or result in, more like. Sorry, not resort, but result in. But you get my point. He didn't get anything meaningful done. All he did was cause, or his administration more like, caused more destruction than solving the actual problems. So after Alaska, a few days later, we go to Washington, D.C. The leaders within Europe, like Macron, Ursula, Zelensky himself, the Chancellor of Germany, Starmer, etc., they all go to Washington, D.C. to try to bully Donald Trump into continuing the war against Russia and not to accept his terms of a peace deal. Now, I'm going to be honest, okay? The deal itself, as I said, is stupid, and it makes no sense for either side. And as I said, I think Donald Trump is only doing this just to get that stupid medal. And the most ridiculous thing that I've heard from him was that he thinks that by stopping the war in Ukraine, that he's going to go to heaven. Really, dude? Considering the shit that's came out with Jeffrey Epstein as of late, and the fact that your judges that you yourself appointed are still blocking the files from going public, leads me to believe that you're not going to heaven. You're going to hell. You're going the other way. You're not going to heaven. You're going the other way. So yeah, it's all ridiculous. Now, Zelensky came a little more prepared, and it looked like some good things came out of it. For him, that is. The odds of the U.S. continuing its support to Ukraine are pretty good. To be fair to him, it looks like the aid to Ukraine is not going to stop. And the United States is going to keep dragging itself down because of this. It's obvious to many, like, if you really know the U.S. government well, they're not going to stop this war. They don't want it to end. Nobody is actually serious about peace. The only way that this thing ends is if somebody simply quits. They give up. Like we saw in Syria. Syrian army just quit, and that was the end. Well, for now, until, of course, those barbarians over there decide to find something else to fight over. And the same with the Afghan army. They quit too. The fact is that somebody in a war will win and lose. This is the reality. Rather, if it be Russia winning or losing, or Ukraine winning or losing, there will only be a winner and a loser in this war in Ukraine. And Donald Trump's ego cannot stop it. The war in Ukraine will be fought to its military conclusion. It will be fought until somebody collapses. It's that simple. Or somebody decides to sue for peace because they just can't fight anymore. I mean, it's basically the same thing, but you get what I'm saying. It's all ridiculous. It's a bunch of retardation, a bunch of copium that Trump is spreading around just to get his declining poll numbers up. I mean, if you ask me, I don't think midterms are looking too good for them, but I could be wrong. With all the gerrymandering and redistricting by Democrats and Republicans, the next House election could go either way. But I digress. Let's talk about the front itself. All right? Enough with this political theater bullshit that most of you probably don't care about at this point. It's a bunch of nonsense. So, let's start with the, Zaporizhzhia direction. Nothing really here has changed too much, except Russians have majority control of Plavny. Stepnogorsk is a stalemate. Ukrainians still control the town, though Russians are continuing to bombard it from the outskirts. And then going a little further into the far eastern side of Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians, after capturing the village of Tamirovka, have now began to advance into Dnipropetrovsk. According to the recent Deep State update, now take it with a grain of salt because it's Deep State after all, the Russians have apparently started advancing in the direction of a few villages. Westward, they are advancing towards Abratine, and going a little northwest, they are advancing in the village of Zaporizhzhia and Novomykolaivka. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation on that, but Russians apparently are within range of 3 border villages, though it appears that the Russians so far have managed to seize complete control over Novohirivka, according to a recent geolocation and a video by the Group of Forces East, or Vostok Group. So that's another village or another settlement in the Dnipropetrovsk region captured by Russia. And now it brings them on the brink of reaching Ternove, which they allegedly captured, I think, during the initial invasion. And it would bring them back to where they started 3 years ago. There's also a report that the Russians have captured the village of Voronezh, but there's nothing other than Vostok Group to confirm it. The Ukrainians have also claimed that they have recaptured the village of Iskra, or Andriivka Kalevstove, but I'm not so sure about this because the footage that they showed of them recapturing it looked like it took place before the Vostok Group recorded the video, because the grass within Iskra itself was burnt in Vostok's video, while in the Ukrainian video, where they claim to recapture it, it was not as burnt. But I'll leave that to you guys in the comment section below to decide whether or not if Iskra fell. But I don't think it matters in the grand scheme of things because it's a small village that really doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. Syriac also claimed that Zeleny Guy is half controlled by Ukrainians and half controlled by Russians, so time will tell if anything really happens there. And the Russians are also advancing in the direction of the village of Filia in Dnipropetrovsk region. So Novopavlivka, I guess, is back on the menu. AMK has also reported that the Russians have lost control over the fields north of Horikove, and Deep State has also confirmed some advances by the Russians towards the village of Muravka, which is also on the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. Udachny is largely the same. The Russians control the entire southern part of the village. And then in the city of Pokrovsk, there has been a total information nightmare. Like fog of war, like nothing really makes sense here. So apparently the Russians were in the city of Pokrovsk, like via Deep Reconnaissance Groups, or DRGs, and it looks like they got kicked out, and now it appears that all the gray zones that Syriac had are now gone, for the most part, and the only part of the city of Pokrovsk that the Russians actually control are these series of blocks here. So, as far as I know, 90 or so percent of Pokrovsk, or Krasnaya Amisk, is under Ukrainian control at this time. Now, do I think that the Russians are going to give up and just, I don't know, not like try to go into the city again? Oh, absolutely not. They'll go in again with their actual military, but I don't know. I feel like they're not going to go into Pokrovsk until they deal with the situation in Rudinsky. And also, there hasn't really been much going on in this part of the front towards Mayanograd, and yeah, that brings us to Rudinsky. So parts of Rudinsky are under Russian control or in a gray zone. The first commie blocks and yeah, overall like low-rise houses and buildings are under Russian control, and some pro-Russian sources claim that more of Rudinsky is under Russian control than as reported by all the mappers, like especially in the West. So time will tell, rather if not, if the Russians will be able to hold these gains in Rudinsky. But I think so far the initiative is in their favor. Also, Syriac has also repainted all these areas back in Ukrainian favor, though I don't know how long this is going to last. And then going in the Dobropila direction, it's a complete quagmire. Like, nothing about this area makes any sense. So after the Russians reach the road past the Golden Well, which is Zoloty Kolodiaz, the Ukrainians sent in a bunch of guys in there, including the Azov battalion, and they have counterattacked in vast numbers. So far, the Ukrainians were able to oust the Russians from this direction, and all is well. Like, that should be the end of it, right? Like, the offensive towards Dobropila has failed. But there's only one problem. None of these advances were really confirmed by the Russian sources, especially like guys who were connected with the Russian army and the Russian government, and as a result, a lot of people seem to over-exaggerate the amount of gains that the Russians actually made in the direction of Dobropila. But also, Deep State colored these areas in gray. They didn't color them in red, which overall makes the situation very confusing. And yeah, this is something I need to say about Deep State, okay? Because of the fact that the government and also, therefore, the security services, the SBU, are overlooking Deep State, they're never going to admit things that are too bad for them. Like, you understand me? I mean, Ukraine, in its current form, is a dictatorship like the Russian Federation is, and because of that, they're never going to tell you what you really need to know. Ukraine fanboys are going to continue to be in the dark about what's really going on the front within the Donetsk region. And also, because of the amount of heavy fog of war, the Russian government has kept their mouths shut. They told the millibloggers that are associated with them to keep their mouths shut, and even Anatoly Radov, who is like one of the more autonomous, like pro-Russian sources, he even hasn't really said a lot about what was going on in Dobropila direction. He did, however, confirm that the Russians were able to capture and control the village of Kutry Vyar, along with the village of Nakonarivka. But other than that, nothing really much has happened. Well, with the exception, of course, with Penkovka being captured, and also Volodomyrivka, according to Radov, is now also being contested by the Russians. Now, I think in order for the Russians to be able to counterattack the Ukrainians here and perhaps push their offensive into Dobropila a little further, they have to capture these villages here. Volodomyrivka, Shakove, Sofivka, and Turetsky. They need to capture all these villages here in order to maintain their momentum, but also to keep going, and also to prevent further counterattacks by the armed forces of Ukraine from actually succeeding. The Ukrainians, of course, want to reverse everything that the Russians gained north of Ryazine, but let's be honest at this point, unless there is some like sort of miracle or some debacle by the Russians themselves, I just don't see them really regaining anything like that huge in this direction. For now, though, it seems the situation in Dobropila direction has cleared up, and while the Russians are continuing to put pressure on the Ukrainians here, it is now clear that they don't have as much control as they actually did. Now, there were DRGs that came to the Dobropila direction and got caught and turned into POWs, but there are no confirmed reports of actual Russian army units going to, for instance, Zoloty Holodiaz. No confirmation whatsoever. Now, in the Konstantinovka direction, so as all of you guys know by now, Toretsk and the city of, or the town of Chasiv Yar have been completely captured by the Russians, which now finally gives them the golden opportunity that they have been awaiting for the past 2 to 3 years. And that is finally entering the Slovyansk and Kramatorsk metropolitan area, which is this large strip of cities here. Konstantinovka, Truskovka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and I guess maybe Liman if you want to count it, I don't know. But this entire strip of urban centers is now completely exposed to the Russians thanks to the control of Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. And also, in addition, there were even reports that the Russians from the village of Pridichine were able to enter the city of Konstantinovka, and that was according to Anatoly Radov. But then the next day or so, he retracted his claims and said, oh, wait a minute, they're not there at all. Never mind. Or something like that. I don't know. I don't know how accurate that is. And also, Divjin, Sofa General Staff, has reported this entire large pocket here between Stupachki and Bila Gora is now under Russian control too. But Radov, though, contests us, saying that they haven't cleared it yet, though they are advancing there. So the armed forces of Ukraine are effectively in another cauldron, as all of you shouldn't be surprised by that by now. And also within the area of Kliban Buk, it's pretty much encircled, and there's not really much the Ukrainians can do here. And also, Shesherbanivka is effectively under full Russian control too now as well, according to Radov. Katernovka is still contested, and Kliban Buk, who the hell knows? Like, we don't know who controls it at this time. Now going a little up north, apparently the Russians have been on somewhat of a winning streak in the Siversk direction, which is very unexpected because for the last 2 years or so, the Russians really haven't done anything in Liman or Siversk direction. But as of recent, the Russians have been on a roll. Syria Bryanka is now under their full control, along with the majority of this forest here. And once they get this entire forested area north of Siversk and Syria Bryanka under their control, it should be able to, they will be able then to advance into Siversk itself and perhaps maybe capture the town. But time will tell, however, because there's obviously still some ground they need to capture down south, but it will definitely make things easier. But if they attack head-on into the town, then I don't know. It's kind of a risk, if you ask me. Now, in the direction of Liman, apparently it is now confirmed that after capturing the village of Torske, the Russians have broken into the village of Zarachny, which is across the river from Torske. And as a result, a good chunk, and according to a recent Creamy Caprice update, basically states that half of Zarachny is under Russian control as of now. So there is effectively maybe a collapse or something of Ukrainian defenses going on in this area. And once Zarachny comes under control, then nothing is effectively stopping the Russians from entering the city of Liman. Though I will say at this time that I don't think they're going to attack it head on just yet. They still need to capture these villages here: Dirilove, Drobshive, Novoselivka, and of course the critical village of Shandry Holove. So yeah, they still have some ways to go, but they are a lot closer now to Liman than they have been since 2022, when they lost it to the armed forces of Ukraine at that time. And also, in Kupiansk direction, apparently there's a report that they have taken these large swaths of land here. I don't know if I reported this in my last update or what, but yeah, they have been able to capture all of this. And also, the situation in Kupiansk city itself still remains largely the same, and despite a geolocation provided by Creamy Caprice, Radov has debunked this, saying, like, from a guy who's actually in Kupiansk itself, saying that the Russians are not there, and that whole, like, thing by Caprice was bullshit. So, yeah. And also, nothing really much has changed in the Kharkov direction, and in the Sumy direction, this will be the last name before I go, Verachny, that is, sorry if I got it wrong, has been recaptured by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, as of late, have become more confident that they'll be able to boot the Russians out of Sumy region, but I don't really know if they have every right to celebrate this time, because most of Yanakovka is still under Russian control. Yeah, so yeah, I think their celebration is a little premature at this time. So, big informational mess. I don't really know what to say other than we probably need to wait another week or so before things truly clear up. But yeah, the Ukrainians are putting up a fight in the central Donetsk region because, I mean, can you really blame them? Like, if Dobropila and Pokrovsk were to fall, then basically the entirety of the remainder of Donetsk region that they still control will be essentially fucked. So, yeah, they're going to keep putting on a fight for it, and it will perhaps turn into another Bakhmut or Avdiivka. I mean, some other big meat grinder that has happened over the last couple of years or so. So, yeah. Well, that's going to do it for today's video, everybody. Hopefully next week it'll be much easier to talk about and less to rant about. And I'll see you all next time. So take care, everybody, and peace out. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.